How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Visit USAA.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and Auto Camp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome to Horror Bytes on Safe Room, the show where we discuss the smaller scares and teenier terrors available to play on your PC. Each week we pick up one or two bite-sized horror games and have a suitably short, sweet chat about them. I'm Neil Bolt, and debating what's real with me as ever is my co-host Jay Krieger. How you doing, Jay?
I'm doing well, man.
And before we get into the game itself, if you do like the sound of what we played, the show notes will include a link to it. And as ever, of course, if you enjoy the game that we played yourself, just consider supporting the developers. Donate, wishlist their future projects, sharing the word on the game, because it all helps them in making their next game and keeping the future bright for the indie horror space. But for this week's pick, we are picking at those intrusive thoughts and seeing if a thread comes loose. And so, Jay, why don't you tell us more about Without a Dawn?
So this is a psychological horror visual novel from developer Jesse Makinen, who we have to give a shout out to for providing us with review codes for it. In this game, you play as a woman who isolates herself in a remote cabin in an attempt to escape her restless thoughts. But throughout this introspection and intertwining narrative, the lines of her and the player's perception of reality will become intertwined with one another. So I was actually a fan of Jesse's previous game, After Dream, which was a 2D side-scrolling game that I reviewed for, I think it was Fearzine magazine. But like similar to Without a Dawn, this is a game, and After Dream was an example of a game that kind of like shows Jesse's knack, I think, for crafting these worlds that are like visually unique. And more importantly, I would say like are very personably written, which is probably the strongest example in his catalog so far. And I think that would be, Without a Dawn. This is a game that largely plays out in conversations that's happening with the protagonist and their internal dialogue with their subconscious. And yeah, like we said in the intro, it's this person that is clearly having struggles, and they are of the mental health related. And it's very interesting to have a game that really does put you in the shoes of a character that is all internal, and the writing, I think, is so evocative that it really allows you to like get into the headspace to understand how they're feeling before any of the supernatural stuff happens, or maybe it's real, maybe it's not, type of conversation that you could have about the plot of this game. And so I think from that standpoint, like, it's the type of experience that does such a great job at just like establishing a character and doing it to the extent that it's like, oh, okay, now I'm a little uneasy before the supernatural happenings occur, because of the fact that I'm trying to decipher like where their headspace, what was their life like a day, a week, a month, a year before you come to them in, Without a Dawn. And so I found that sort of like capturing their anxieties and whatnot was really quite effective. And I think ultimately it is a testament just to the writing here, that you're able to derive a great deal about them within the opening moments of the game. And it's only about an hour long experience. So there's a very like concise character study that's done through, I think, just like living through a situation as this person. In terms of what the player's doing, in terms of like a visual novel approach, you're going to be given, a scenario, given an option, and the options are of the fair that they're reflective again of like that character's sort of mental state. Like some parts of it are like, oh, are you going to get up and investigate, or are you just going to stay in bed? And that gets fleshed out a little bit more further that you go into Without a Dawn. But I just thought that it was a really interesting use of not only like that character study, like I said, but like genre conventions as well, right? Because one of the first things early on that you can do in this is you're tasked with like, oh, I feel like someone's watching me. If I get up and look outside the curtains or look through the curtains, I can kind of like alleviate that stress and I can kind of like push that thought out of my mind. But the player doesn't have to do that. They have one of two options. And it's just interesting how, you're really able to create that tension without leading with a lot of like in your face scares or something like that early on. Now, we'll get into it. Some of the surrealness of this game, I think, does a lot to kind of like complement that writing and the atmosphere here that Jesse's created.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I think one of those sort of horror spaces that is always quite interesting to see how it's done is, like the horrors of the mind and like how tropey that can be in terms of, is someone going mad? Is this all real, sort of thing? You've seen it done many, many times. You've seen it done very poorly, and you've seen it done very well. But in a way that this is done, and it being so intimate and so personal, is quite different from what I'm used to, I must say. Because, we're used to characters talking to themselves to like get to a point in a story. Like, that's fine, especially in like visual novels. It's a big part of that. Here, it's one person, but it's two people effectively. It's the internal voice and the external. You don't really hear much of the external voice. You just, apart from what you choose, so to speak. But the internal voice is always there. The reasoning, prodding, pushing, making you think those things beyond what is actually in front of your face. The line you said about the window is a very interesting one because it plants a seed, and with the mindset of the character, that leads to a repeat of that scene coming later that is different, and you could argue is manifested from not being able to let go of that. A lot of what's going on in their life is clearly about not being able to shake these thoughts, shake these worries and concerns and the stress that it gives them. It's like, and they're trying to find ways to cope and make routines. And I think where the game eventually goes is a very dark version of that, which is a very real problem of like the solutions getting more extreme, more drastic, and to the way it's handled is really admirable. Like because of the progression, because of what you're shown before you get to that point, it's really brilliant stuff. And I think like the ASCII style art really does help that as well, because it's detail. When the character wakes up, every time, and that sort of slow opening of the eyes and blinking stuff, it's subtle, it's small, but it's so effective in sort of having that sort of vacancy in the moment, but going beyond that and just living in the thoughts and worries, like that. It's most of the motion and action comes from outside of that, in the dreams, and like, and there's little touches of reality as well, like going outside and the descriptions of how it feels compared to just, and it really tugs at the central thing of what's going on here. The idea of like what's safe, what isn't safe for you, and what feels safe may be dangerous for you, and vice versa, and the complexity of that, and I think at the end where Jesse sort of pops up to sort of talk about making the game, like that, and thank you for playing. It mentions about, lots of rewrites and things and just tweaking, and you can really feel that in the sense of like making the words count, making the imagery match up with the words as well. And yeah, it's just an all-round phenomenal job, in terms of like displaying mental health problems and using the horror of them in a way that is both supernatural and personal. And that is done, as we said, it's been done so many times in so many different ways, but when it's done in such a fluid way as this, you have to shout it out and say that, fantastic. Really is. What I saw this game originally, I'd already bought it, and when you came back about the keys, and I was like, yeah, no, I got this a while ago, sort of thing, and it's like I can go around to playing it, but always with this in mind, of course, and doing an episode on that. And yeah, as much as the visual hook is a great thing, like I said, it's a phenomenal use of a limited art style. It is the writing that really just pulls everything together, and and even the music, to be fair, as well. Just simple, haunting, does the job. Little sound here and there as well, which some great little sound effects moments. Yeah, it's basically stream of consciousness sort of thing right now, trying to like reel through all the things that just like a really remarkable game. But yeah, I think it's fairly obvious to say it's bloody good. Great.
Yeah. It's terrific. And yeah, to just wrap up and kind of champion something that you were talking about, like it's very rare, I find these days, with like psychological horror where the horror aspect doesn't dilute the real world sentiment and the real world experiences that psychological horror is often examining, right? The horrors that people face regardless of the supernatural. And so to see a game that's able to like take the supernatural and not have it dilute the actual messaging or explorate that sort of like introspective or philosophical at times nature of the story here, and the writing is quite a testament, I think, to just overall like that this is the type of experience that just like is clearly indicative of somebody that is telling a very personal story and using genre to explore it in a way that maybe makes that more palatable for some people, or just acting as horror being a vessel for real world experiences and these things. So yeah, just all around really fantastic, from the writing to the overall production value.
Yeah, and like as straight up horror moments go, and this has some really effective stuff. Like
Yes.
talking about the window and the blinds thing, like the repeat of that thing and what happens in it is actually amazing. I just, again, the use of the ASCII art is just ridiculously good there, in terms of how the motion moves, and it's so different to using something chunkier in terms of like pixel art or whatever. And yeah, it suits this game down to a T, and I really think it does feed into this sort of odd space that doesn't feel quite normal. That it does kind of feel dreamlike, as an art style, and in a in a sort of digital sense, which again just suits this game brilliantly.
I just wanted to say one last thing, because you were mentioning how effective the actual horror elements are in this, and I would say that when we briefly mentioned the use of sound earlier, there's one instance where the protagonist is faced with something on a path and they close their eyes, and just the way in which the sound design is able to build the tension in that moment was like genuinely incredibly skin crawling, which is not something that I usually attribute to like visual novels, right? They're able to make to like be intriguing and whatnot, but like a visual novel that's able to like genuinely have this moment of like terror, I thought was really, really impressive, and through the use of that sound design. So yeah.
Yeah, well put, well put. But yeah, that is all we have for this week. Thank you again, Jay, for talking about these games with me. And of course, if you listener, if you're just a regular listener, or if you're a developer, and you have a short horror game, a demo, a game jam entry, or proof of concept that you think we should be highlighting you can email us at saferoompod@gmail.com. And Jay will give you the blue sky.
And you guys can follow us over on Blue Sky for show updates at Safe Room Pod.
Okay, you're making the most of that
Doing what I
now.
can.
That's it. We'll be back with more small scale horror next week.